episode here. We've got a great guest here. I'm really excited about this. I followed this guy for many years. He's, been driving a lot of the science in baseball for a while. And therefore, that's how I learned about him. And, then you start realizing, wow, that this guy's influencing a lot of these studies. And then it's like, who is this guy? I want to meet this guy. And then I wound up crossing his path, or we started talking when he was working for a major league team. And then I started realizing that this guy's really cool too. He's not just a nerd scientist. He's a really good dude. He's played the game. And I really see him as being a big influencer, which he is, and which he's becoming now that he's moved in more of the, out of professional ball. But it's Ryan Crotin, or I probably should be saying Dr. Crotin. Thanks for coming on.
I appreciate it. I love what you do too. So this is a great honor to be on your podcast.
Thanks, Ryan. And all that sincere, man. That's kind of really how I ran across you. And I don't want to sell you short because there's a lot more to your career. So you mind if I go through some things that I've found online about you?
Sure. Yeah. Hopefully it's all safe.
Yeah,
it's all internet safe.
Well, it's off your LinkedIn. So that'll
okay. Beautiful.
You like here, summarize real quick. You've in your statement or your bio, it says you focus on serving others in their quest to compete at a higher level. So that's something we have in common. You're focusing on defining key performance metrics that transfer and being dynamic and collaborative and implementing a multidisciplinary approach. We'll probably go into a lot of like more layman's terms on stuff on all this.
Sure.
You've over to your professional career, you worked with the Angels as the director of performance integration. You are now with armcare.com. You're also serving as a PhD at the University or Louisiana Tech. Am I correct?
Yeah, Louisiana Tech.
And you have a ton of studies. And I mean, I would love, I know we don't have time. I mean, that's how many studies you have. To be able to go through all your studies would take months. And they're incredibly valuable to the industry. Anything that I missed?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. The only other thing is I'm also a research associate at Auckland University of Technology in the Sport Performance Institute in New Zealand. And there we're really interested in defining safer ways of increasing arm speed and arm strength. So I got a student right now that's in the US that we're looking at weighted sleeves. And it's quite interesting. We're kind of opening up a new avenue. So I think you rounded out everything that I've done and been doing.
And let's dive into that. That's the topic, man. It really needs to be the topic. It's something where I think you and I are passionate about. It's about arm injury. How do we keep these guys healthy? And my thing is, because I came from the game as an injured rotator cuff, a guy whose career was completely changed, probably should have been over. And it was able to not just get back, but play at a high level with it. But it's my mission in this was to find the better way. And so my approach has been the kinetic chain. I mean, once I truly learned and understood the kinetic chain, it took forever. But once I truly learned it, I was like, how is there any other way? Ryan, is there any other way than the kinetic chain approach?
No, I mean, when it comes to throwing health, you don't want to have weaknesses in any link. But what I can tell you, and this is why I love armcare.com, and I don't want to make this salesy. I'm plugging this company so much because I believe in it. The distal chain, so from the shoulder to the fingertips, that always has to be the priority. It's really interesting in strength and conditioning, and talking to sports scientists, talking to coaches. They're always looking at things from the ground up, and I get it. But the main event where athletes are getting injured is from the shoulder to the fingertip. And the elbow especially is a big issue. And what we need to be able to do is ensure that we have the capacity to handle joint loads and changes in joint loads, because every rep is going to be different. You're going to stride slightly different. You're going to, it's variable to a degree. But when we have fatigue and we get outside of that bandwidth, when we talk about the kinetic chain, when we lose certain properties in our lower body, our pelvis, our trunk, rotation gets off, and now it has an effect on the arm. if we have that distal chain capacity, the force transfers from the shoulder to the fingertips, if we have that dialed in, the messages strength matters most, we'll be able to withstand those loads. And it'll allow us to have this adaptability and adjustability to reduce risk of injury.
And, when you came into armcare.com, I got to know Dugan, what he's done, with his other ventures and crossover symmetry, but I really loved what he just has a great mindset, and he really is he's doing great things in all industries. And we're lucky to have someone like him. And when he brought you on, I was like, this guy knows what he's doing, man. I was really excited when you came in, because I knew that he was going to do something with this. And that's why I think it's becoming such a big force. It's been a big referral for me. I refer a lot of people to armcare.com, and we want to get more into what it is. But it really is something that every coach, player should have. I mean, wouldn't you say? I mean, I'm selling your own product here, but
yeah, man, it's beautiful. I mean, the issue I have in today's world of baseball, and it's hard to stomach, but we may be training our athletes into injury. Okay. And the reason being is that a lot of our programming in arm care is posterior dominant. And this makes a lot of sense for velocity. We always hear the old adage, whatever you can accelerate, you have to be able to decelerate. However, we need to decelerate the arm when it lays back, when it goes into maximal external rotation. It's just not in terms of just accelerating the arm to ball release. And the problem being is that when our programs are not utilizing a data-led approach, they're not using dynamometry. If you use our product, great. We want you to. It's easy to use. But if you got other options for dynamometry, you got to use them. Because if you keep furthering the imbalance, you make your external rotator cuff so much stronger. Now, concentrically, it has greater layback speed. And eccentrically, so breaking that layback position, getting your internal rotators to have tension while it's lengthening, to slow the arm. If we got that imbalance, well, you got to think your arm is a catapult. You're pulling back the catapult so much faster, and we can't perceive this to the eye. We're throwing the catapult back so much faster to load that arm that you think the hinge is your elbow, right? Now you're opening that elbow at a higher rate. You're accelerating that catapult back. You're developing greater force loads. So we can be training our athletes into injury. And in this world, I mean, Brent, like I'm watching your stuff online. I'm watching the videos. I'm watching how specific you are with data. Why are we still writing generalized training programs when the technology, the education is there, and the athlete needs to be accepted as an individual?
Exactly. I mean, great point. I mean, there's core principles here. I mean, there's core principles that everyone needs to apply. But what you're finding and what you're saying is, in my experience, is that individually they're using those core principles differently. So that's where the individuality comes into it. It's like, okay, you're playing these things well, but you're not playing these things well. So we need to really focus on those things. But if it's too general and you don't even have a good foundation of core principles, you might not be really putting the emphasis where the athlete truly needs it, specifically if it's to get out of injury.
Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head, man. And let's face it, it's reality. You got to throw hard in baseball. You have to get drafted, to go to college. You advance your velocity and you don't have other pitches, you're still going to be attractive. You got a plus fastball and nothing else works. There's going to be interest from college coaches. There's going to be interest from scouts. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to become a major league pitcher, because there's other things that you got to support that velocity with better hitting. But we need to ensure that our strength is also escalating with our velocity. So when I was with the Angels, at the beginning, I was scanning the document, my data reports for athletes that their velocity was dipping. As soon as I saw a dip in a half mile an hour, I was like, okay, I'm cluing in on this guy. What's he doing for arm care? What's he doing for training? Is there fatigue effects, workload, all those things that you're going to talk about? And I avoided the guys who are getting gains in velocity. I said, I'm not worrying about them. We got 150 pitchers. I'm just focusing on the guys that are decreasing. That's a fatigue effect, right? What I'll tell you is that the players that advanced their velocities, they had a higher risk of injury because what I was doing is then cross-referencing the joint strength measures and finding that strength was going down and velocity was going up. So their risk of injury was much more severe than an athlete that's losing velocity, because when we lose velocity, that protects us from injury. That's telling us that's a fatigue response. That's not a compensation, guys. It's a natural effect that says, hey, you're tired. We don't want to do so much with your arm because we're going to put it at risk. So we're slowing down the accelerations. We're not accelerating as much. Now, what happens is when the athlete's fatigued, strength is going down and velocity is going up. Those properties, that velocity gain is happening from elasticity. That's stretch loading. You got to think, like, if I got a rubber band and I'm stretching that thing and it's getting really thin, you know, it's lost its strength. Like, it's not a thick rubber band anymore. It's all based on now I can yank on it more. It's got to blow. It's got to start micro damaging first. And then all of a sudden the athlete, they don't sense it at the beginning. And then you'll see, you know, a few days later, they're on the treatment report and they're getting treatment for their throwing arm. Now it's starting to develop soreness. Now it turns into a flexor strain. And then it's conservatively treated, and the guy goes back out. And then now the flexor strain becomes a partial UCL tear, you know, and then he gets PRP. And then we wait, we try to build him back up again. And then he goes back out and then it blows. So the whole thing is, when we advance velocity, we got to advance strength. We have to show that those things are happening together.
And it has to be. And it's just crazy how I've seen velocity programs, and I'm not here I don't want to go into attacking people. When I've seen other velocity programs, I've gotten a lot of trouble for that. When you see other velocity programs, and they're proud to say there's a disassociation in our training, meaning like we've specialized in velocity and we also specialize in injury prevention. And they almost are proud to say there's a separation between the two. Like, oh, if you want our injury prevention program, you got to do this. But if you want our velocity program, like, and I was like, that to me that makes no sense. Logically, that's not how it works. Like, the kinetic chain doesn't work that way. Like, for example, you saw, you know, where if velocity is going up, someone could be way more vulnerable to injury if fatigue is the problem, meaning they have to come together. So I asked the question, when you see those velocities go up and then you're looking for fatigue or injury protocol, why are their velocities going up if we see fatigue or we see things breaking down? Then I start questioning, do they have or are they developed in a velocity approach effectively? Like, do they understand there is two different types of velocity? Have they worked to develop the healthy velocity, which typically comes with the efficiencies to be able to handle injury? And more than likely, I would feel like an athlete that's trained better, more kinetic chain, you wouldn't probably see guys increasing velocity and all these other injury risk factors popping up, because they would ultimately go together. Like you said, those would be the guys losing velocity because that's their system protecting itself. I don't know. I mean, do you find that there's probably maybe it's a valid approach or a valid statement that those that are increasing velocity and not, you know, and focusing on injury are the ones that are ultimately not taking a good approach? We can do them both. Like, we can put velocity and arm health together.
Yeah, you know, you're touching on this, man. It's awesome. The metric that we really focus on is called the strength velocity ratio. Okay, this is where the two worlds come together. All right, and the unit is pounds per miles per hour. So we know that we need a certain amount of absolute strength relative to velocity to keep healthy. And we ran a bunch of simulations, and I used some of my previous experience. Nobody's ever researched this. Nobody's ever put it out. And if they have, great, but it hasn't been published. And what we want to be able to do is we want to keep a maintenance ratio of 1.6. So your strength should be 60% of your velocity. That's really a goal.
That's cool.
For players. And when we start seeing strength go down and velocity going up, now that ratio is going down, it's diving down. We need to get on our programming and say, all right, training and throwing programming, it's like a volume mixer for making music. It's like one dials up, one dials down. And when we see this, we have to be able to make a pivot and say, okay, now the arm is really strong. Let's dial up the throwing intensity. And then all of a sudden we see the ratio change. It's like, okay, here's an adjustment. We got to add a recovery day. We might throw away a push day. If we have a heavy intensity velocity session on Tuesdays and Fridays, let's say, maybe you skip Tuesday and it becomes recovery. So, now we're working on intensifying strength that when my push day comes on Friday, it's like, man, I'm back at 1.6. That's where I need to be and just keep pushing it. So in a nutshell, if I throw 100 miles an hour using our app, we want to see you guys have 160 pounds of strength in the throwing arm.
That's really cool. And that's, people need to have simple ways to understand it, but they also need like the application that you guys have to really record this data and monitor something that they can look back to and see, okay, this is when I was healthy, I was in these, metrics and these measurements. And then obviously this is when I feel broken down and I can see the change. I think once you give an athlete that, it's like, you don't have to tell them twice, it's like they get it because obviously their motive is not to get hurt. And once you just teach them something, there's real something tangible here that can give you, insight into what's going on. And then now you can actually control it. And I think that's what armcare.com, y'all are doing really well. And I think that's why everybody needs the program, needs the product, is because it's going to give you something to really sink your teeth into to understand what's going on in your body and why you would ever even fall into injury.
Yeah. There's a lot of, the thing is I went to this ABCA conference. I know you were there, Brent. We were supposed to connect and I really wanted to go over to your
We're both busy
booth. Yeah. I saw you, setting up, my world as a strength coach. That's kind of like where my mind is. That's why I really am drawn to the things that you're doing, because you have that message, strength matters most. Even though you're selling the TopVelocity program, right? It's founded on strength, which I love. So I wanted to get there, but a lot of the people that would come to us at the booth, they were not really grasping the concept of, why we need to integrate this. There are other technologies.
I'm laughing.
Yeah, other technologies to them were so much more appealing, like whether I'm going to measure external load wearing a sleeve, or I'm going to track ball characteristics like with Rapsodo, or, some of these companies, they're great. They're all great. They're all useful in player development. There's not anything I can say negatively about the technologies that are out there. The problem is that we're focused too much on metrics that don't translate to experience, right? And innings pitched, for me, when we talk about pitchers, position players, they have arm injuries too. So plate appearances for them and innings pitched are the most important stats for me. It's the most important stats for armcare.com, because we know if the athlete is not getting enough at bats, they're not pitching enough innings, they're not gaining experience, and experience is the driven component. I say this to every athlete, you need experience. You come into the minor leagues, there's a certain amount of innings you need to become better. There's a certain amount of at-bats you need to become better, and if we don't honor this, if we don't make the health component a priority, and we don't evaluate on a continual basis where our athletes' throwing arm status is, they get hurt. We're looking at 12 to 18 months. They've lost so many innings. They've lost, an opportunity in some regards to be noticed. So, talking to coaches, I'm like, man, I'm trying to help you. I really want you to grasp the concept that you need to monitor these things. So one, individualize your training, but individualize your throwing. We evaluate strength after throwing. We want to know how fatigable the athlete is. This fits in aligned with everything. If you're using the pulse sleeve, you now have external tracking, and now you have strength measures, and you're able to know, okay, this is what my workload is for the day, but hey, this guy's strength is down by like 10, 15%. I need to make an adjustment here. he's not ready for this today. And it allows us to fact check, you know, when it comes to biomechanics, or people are using a great product, ProPlay AI. I love it. But we have to be able to look at this data and say, all right, when I look at these biomechanics, is it strength driven or is it really a coordination problem? Because I'll tell you, in 99% of the problems, especially when it looks at arm path, it's a strength issue. You know, the shoulder isn't strong enough to hold position. Sometimes it's a length issue. Typically, you know, they go hand in hand. And so, you know, our app does that too. We have an IMU for range of motion, but, you know, we look at Rapsoda data, we're looking at spin, we're looking at all sorts of things that's coming out of the hand and the ball. You know, that's all driven by arm strength. It is. So we gotta put it on the front burner, not the back burner.
Yeah, unfortunately, the coaches aren't as incentivized as the players to figure this out. You know, and I think we definitely see that. You were up at the major league level. It's very evident there, because I mean, I'm not going to say it was, but I was in an office with the president of a team, and he said if we put 10 players on a weighted ball approach and 4 get better and 4 blow out, 2 nothing happens, we're happy. So injury obviously isn't as important to them because they have such a herd of talent. And that's why, unfortunately, I think I'm a player first mentality, but I'll never fit in a major league organization because of that, I feel like. So, but the thing is, this is who we're speaking to. We're really speaking to the individuals, those who are actually doing this. I'm telling you, there is no better way to do this, and there's no one more incentivized to do this and get into armcare.com than the actual player. The coaches are kind of the one behind them, you know, when it really comes to, you know, those are going to be driven to help in this field, you know.
I see eye to eye with you, because I remember when we started a velocity enhancement program or weighted ball program, I think it was in 16. I came to the Angels in 17. We had a lot of injuries. We weren't monitoring the guys. We just assumed we were kind of taking someone else's program, and we were working on expanding it. You know, a little of the adaptation was coming from the strength program. We knew that, you know, we couldn't push the envelope when the guys are pounding it for, you know, all the volumes and the weighted balls that they're using. So we knew we couldn't double up. We had a lot of injuries, man.
You just said the adaptation was coming from the strength program. Can you elaborate?
Yeah. So, you know, what we had found is that the vertical jump had a big emphasis. The vertical jump and lean mass development, it should make sense, had a huge involvement on developing velocity. Okay. And when we started to evaluate arm strength wasn't really improving with weighted ball training. It was arm speed that was coming from stretch, from layback increases, catapults getting, you know, able to go back. But the strength program, we're putting lean mass on the guys and we're increasing their jump height. And with those two components, they have more power. You know, there are lots of different ways to calculate power, from jump height and body mass. You can look online.
Like the Harmon formula.
Yeah, there's so much. I would use the Sayers formula. That's a better formula, because it was developed on athletes instead of PE students. But what I can tell you is that, you know, now we're gaining momentum, right? We have more powerful legs, a more powerful system. We're able to now create body speed, right? And now it's a heavier body and momentum. And I've studied momentum in pretty deep detail, linear and rotational momentum, and that's mass times velocity. That's the equation, right? You increase the athlete's body speed, you increase the athlete's mass, they are going to throw faster. And we're not even talking about the arm. We're talking about total mass, right? So that was a big emphasis. But, you know, aligned with what you were saying with the previous experience you had with the front office members, one of our front office members said to us, when 90% of our athletes, they didn't get hurt, that 50% of them got hurt in the program. And then the other guys were getting hurt in competition, and they weren't so severe injuries. We had a couple Tommy Johns, but, you know, an injury is an injury. When you get sidelined because you got a flexor strain or your shoulders bothering you, you got impingement or whatever's happening, I mean, that's an injury to me. But when we talked to the front office, they said the same thing. They said, well, that's just the cost of doing business. And when I got that information, I felt kind of,
Let down.
it didn't rub me the right way, because I like, we're not doing enough for our kids. And I got 2 sons, God willing, they play baseball, and that they can pitch, because I always wanted to be a pitcher. And, going to an organization that, has kind of the preconceived notion that we're going to have, guys getting damaged and banged up. It's like, you don't want to have the mentality that, yeah, you're going to win the war and you're going to have a lot of casualties, because in pro ball, usually these programs are given to kids. It's like a last choice, right? It's a last choice. It's the last thing they do. And some of them, it's either you do this or you get released, and they do it and they get hurt. Now, the effects of this is that now these players that were potential releases for a professional team, they're now in your rehabilitation program. You now have to rehabilitate them. And now the players that are high priority that are hurt, it gets watered down. So what happens when we don't manage these things? We just say, hey, this is cost of doing business. It's affecting the athletes that are, your return on investment, and you're overwhelming, the sports medicine officials that are doing the rehabilitation. And now you got, okay, it was once 7 guys, and now you have 12, and you got 1 return to performance coordinator. And I've seen a lot of teams are adding more people, more physical therapists at the minor league level. What does that tell you? Something's not right. You're putting a lot more of the medical staff in the organizations because you're trying to manage a lot more injuries, where it's like the cost of doing business is in our minds, but the cost of doing business costs teams wins, costs the higher priority athletes the treatment they need. If you really, are taking a flyer on a player and you really don't know, you're not like super excited about them and they got an injury history per se, you might as well just release them. There's no sense putting them in this program, having another injury, add another body, and it waters down your rehabilitation, because you'll burn out your staff. Your strength staff gets burnt out. They're trying to individualize, right? The rehabilitation has to be individualized. And they're now managing this for 12, 15 athletes. I know some teams that, they have over 20 athletes, throwing athletes with throwing arm injuries in their return to performance program. And that concerns me. It's like our dynamometer, $250. We measure at a research grade. All right. And we are very accurate up until 40 kilograms. So that's 88 pounds. Nobody's really going to produce that much force in their throwing arm. So it's pretty accurate. But still, the hesitancy is that maybe they don't know how to integrate it. It's a 6-minute test. That's something that we need to be able to do routinely. But, especially for these athletes in these weighted ball programs, especially for these athletes that are in rehabilitation, we have to make the assessment. We don't want them to hang out there. You know what I mean? You don't want your athletes to hang out in rehabilitation. You don't want that to happen. You want to progress them, and you don't want them to go in the program. So, I'm with you on the cost of doing business. It makes me almost sick. Like, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, it's like, these are people's arms. We're talking about somebody who's really is a person, and we're not valuing their health. We're pushing to the brink and not doing what we need to do for them. So I know that's a pretty long rant for you, but just saying I'm connected with you, buddy. I'm right on.
Well, the thing is, that's been my mission behind it, was that mentality. And I always relate it to almost like the smoker's mentality. When you're like, smoking causes cancer. They're like, well, we're going to die. We're all going to die anyways. And it's the same kind of mentality. It's like, oh, do you want to die now or after a full life? It's like, do you want to get injured now or have a full career? And I don't understand that mentality. And it's almost like they're either addicted to their current mentality, like a smoker, or they just don't believe anything else exists. And I think, to be honest, a lot of them just don't believe there's a better way. Mm-hmm. But I think Major League Baseball failed in the very beginning. I know the first thing they brought into a professional organization was a physical therapist before a strength coach. And so they took the wrong first step from the beginning, and they have yet to recreate that. I think they're trying. I mean, I'm definitely happier where it's going today, but they've been really in a recovery or recreative recorrective position as these with baseball. It's because they weren't doing it right in the first place, so it's like they're having to refix everything. But how does this play into it? One of my favorite studies, and I think, because I think we're all trying to really get to these core principles, and you've been talking about them as well, like the interior stabilizers and external rotation. Like, are we measuring that? Like, that's important because that's what's compressing that shoulder joint, so it doesn't want to pull apart. But here's a great study. What do you think about that? I'm curious on your thought about this. You've probably read it, but associations between glenohumeral rotational strength and select kinetic parameters during the baseball pitch in adolescent baseball pitchers. And the conclusion here is basically the result of this study provided initial evidence for a potential mechanism behind throwing related pain in adolescent pitchers with throwing arm reduced external rotation strength ratios. Clinicians should be focusing on strengthening the ER musculature of pitchers as a means of correcting strength imbalances between the glenohumeral rotators. I'll tell you more. So basically, what they were finding is the actual mechanism of the body's, central nervous system to accelerate arm speeds. That actual mechanism requires the IR to shut off, not shut off, but weaken as it lays back, so it can accelerate quicker. Actually, no, I think it's on the other side. It's the ER weakens, so the external rotators weaken as the arm goes forward, because it's just like the brakes in the accelerator in a car, right? If our external rotators are stabilizing or pulling too hard and you're trying to accelerate arm speed, then you're actually going to affect arm speed. So how do we look at this mechanism that it looks like the arm actually has to weaken the decelerators to move faster? So, and also ultimately, it's like the harder we throw, just the quicker we're going to get injured, right?
Well, the thing is these injuries, there's a lot to unpack here, but these injuries are tensile driven, right? It's overstretching. You got some compression injuries that, happen at the elbow. We're pinching tissues, compression injuries like shoulder impingement, where you're pressing in on the superior rotator cuff underneath the acromion. Those are compression injuries, but most of the bad injuries, slap tears, Tommy John surgery related risks, they're basically tension driven. And like what you're saying is like, I wouldn't say weaken, but there's this reciprocal inhibition. So, when I'm activating my internal rotator cuff, my external rotator cuff doesn't activate so that I can make that movement. Because if they're both active at the same time, it's rigid. It's not going anywhere.
Right.
But the thing is that there gets to a point where that rotator cuff, this is part of our brain, our sensory motor unit area, motor area that's telling us, hey, you're releasing the ball. All right, at this point, my brain's saying, hey, external rotator cuff, bam, right? And that's while it's under tension. That external rotator cuff is lengthened, and the muscles around it are lengthened to decelerate. So it's kind of like switching on and off. But when you're talking about this study, I got to read this study. Actually, you got to send it to me. Sounds beautiful. But when they're talking about in this study, they're talking about, when they're measuring the strength, how is that ratio? And really what we try to do is get them to be 1-to-1. A lot of research shows that like baseball players are typically between 0.67 and 0.75, so 67% of their internal rotator cuff, the ones that accelerate the arm forward, is of, the strength, or the external rotator cuff is of the strength of that internal rotator cuff at that level. But we want the external rotator cuff to be at least 85% strength of the internal rotator cuff, the muscles that accelerate the arm forward. So the muscles that cause the braking have to be strong. And in our mind, I don't know the actual physiologic connection. It's neurological for sure. And it's also, proprioceptive in the joint, that it's just telling you, hey, I got a lot of strength back here. So I got the parachute that can allow this drag race car to just go, because I can put the parachute on, and the problem is that the strength, your parachute has a little bit of holes in it, it's not that good, or your parachute's too small, that car's going all over the place, and it's going to probably rip off the back end of that parachute. So that's the back of the arm, right? But we're getting to a point, I think, that we're slanting too heavily in the posterior cuff. I agree. The posterior cuff strength's got to be up there because that's velocity driven. But remember, we talked about, velocity versus injury. Most of the injuries in baseball are happening in layback. The highest forces of the elbow are when the arm is almost at maximal external rotation. Slap tears are mostly peel back. So peel back mechanisms are when my arm bone, the humerus, is rolling backward. It's twisting the bicep tendon at the labrum. It's creating tension. Those are layback injuries, right? So think about it. Like if we keep beefing up the strength of the external rotator cuff and the internal rotator cuff is really weak, all those muscles that stabilize the arm, they're not really supporting the strength. In the slap tear, I was just on a conference. There's an ASMI sports medicine conference going on, and I heard 100 doctors, talking about how slap tears are the last things. They don't want to repair them because the comeback from a slap tear is so bad.
Yeah.
And the reason why a slap tear is bad and why they happen is that the bicep increases its activity to resist the layback. It becomes a stabilizer when the internal rotator cuff is weak. So we got to start thinking biomechanically. We got to start thinking anatomically, and we have to adjust our programs like that, man. And it's hard. We're in this world, like what you said, is it velocity or is it health? But I think we can play together. I really do, by monitoring,
I mean, and it's there biomechanically. Like that's where I feel like, TopVelocity, what we're trying to do, we're not, I mean, it's different. It's like we're really focusing on biomechanics. You guys are more focused on determining the capacity of strength in the muscles that are being injured in the arm. And that's why I hope guys that come in TopVelocity go to arm care. Like I think we really complement each other, what we're doing here, because I'm taking my guys and going, yeah, strength is king. But at the same time too, if I'm getting my arm, when my arm wants to accelerate, if it's elbow in front of my face, then the time to release and deceleration now is cut short. Also, I'm opening the gap in supination where I'm holding tension in the elbow. Now I'm opening that gap, which is what's holding that gap together is the UCL. Now, it's like, so how did I get here, which is where I don't want to be, going into internal rotation acceleration. So let's track that back and let's make sure we get biomechanically into better positions. So now we don't have to constantly rely on capacity of strength in the arm. It's great. We want as much as we can get, but what if I could get a high level of capacity of strength, but the actual stress is somewhere way down here. I'm not actually, constantly relying on my strength capacity, but it's the best of both, right? We need to biomechanically have a better approach, and then we need to have a better strength approach and understanding our strength capacity in our arms.
Oh yeah, I mean, and I think the world, like I'm a biomechanist and a strength coach. Strength comes before biomechanics to me, and it's kind of weird for people to hear that, but the intersection of where we need to get our research is to, have to mirror the throwing arm mechanics and strength. So for instance, you're talking about an athlete with a pushy delivery where the elbow leads at layback, right? So they're at maximal external rotation and the elbow is ahead of the trunk, right? I believe, they're becoming obviously more tricep oriented. They're getting more velocity from elbow extension than internal rotation because that athlete potentially has really strong external rotator cuff muscles, really weak internal rotator cuff muscles to accelerate the arm forward. So the compensation is elbow first, elbow extension velocity is my principal component to give me velo. So that's the other thing too, man, as biomechanists, I really encourage the people that are out there to not just look at movement, look at physiology, look at fatigue, look at all these different elements to be able to have a real global perspective of performance. Because, and that's where we're going. I mean, at Louisiana Tech, man, Dr. David Zemansky, for people who don't know him, you got to watch him. You got to watch his stuff on LinkedIn. Nobody collects data like this guy, not in pro ball, not in anywhere, in my opinion. He's got a smaller number of athletes to work with, and that's the advantage. But he's connecting all the dots. He is, and I'm just kind of along for the ride to guide some research design and monitor students and write. But like, we have to get to a place where it's comprehensive with our athletes. Can't look at them with one factor.
Yeah, no, I know we're cutting off here. Well, we got maybe 2 more minutes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, why don't yeah, I mean, I think that's perfect. I think, what you guys, the need, and anyone watching this, the need for armcare.com is to truly understand, I'm going to put it this way, to truly understand how well you're using your body to get forces to the ball. Because my approach is, if you're not using it well, you're going to have to rely on a lot more strength at the end to survive. And armcare is monitoring it either way. It's just basically saying, okay, are you prepared today to throw healthy? So that everyone here needs armcare.com for that. I'm just saying with us, we're just trying to help them not have to rely on armcare so much, armcare.com, but they still need it because it's no better tool to truly understand what's paying you your bills. Is your arm healthy today? I mean, would that be from my perspective, is that accurate or no?
Yeah, I mean, it all has to fit together.
Yeah.
It really does. And for the serious competitive athlete, why would you leave anything on the table to compete? Why would you do that? And I think about that too with athletes that are gravitating. The younger athletes are saying, I'm not going to do so much strength training. I'm going to go for my velocity program, and I don't have anything against weighted balls. I just think you got to be the right age. There's a few checklists that have to be met, and it's got to be evaluated. You need an analytics platform like what we have to monitor the athlete, but you got to give yourself the absolute best competitive advantage, and you don't want to miss time. Again, experience. You're missing training days. When we miss a day of training, those are reps that we can never get back in our lives. We miss opportunities to become better. So, I really tell athletes, hey, your body is your business. I care about you, you're my business, but it's your body and you got to care about your own body. You need to do everything possible to put yourself in a place that you can compete at the highest level.
You're right. Too many people think Tommy John's a good thing, but you lose 2 years of your career, so it should be avoided. And, using something like armcare.com is going to help you do that. All right. So how can they find you? Tell them how to get more information, or if they want to learn more about armcare, even though it's armcare.com, but give them more information. Yeah,
our website's really easy, armcare.com. My personal email, I'm going to give it to everybody who's listening to this. It's Ryan, RYAN, at armcare.com. You can email me with any questions you have. If you've got interest in any things that we said here today and much more. I'm active on LinkedIn. I like putting stuff out there, and I feel bad, but a lot of my messages are pushing this product, and it's not because I'm trying to make financial gain. It's because I truly care. I care about the coaches. I care about the players. Coaches, you guys get fired now. It's not just the strength coaches anymore. It's not just the medical staff anymore. Pitching coaches are getting fired for injuries. So it's a big problem. And I want people to acknowledge it and do everything they can do for their athletes, man, and for their own careers. So, reach out to me. I'm always open to communicate. I love meeting people.
And I know I'm going to be on your podcast, and if we don't cover it all there, I want to bring you back on here. So
awesome, man. Let's do it.